There is a kazoo solo on the second Pink Floyd album. It arrives in the middle of a song called Corporal Clegg, and it is, by any reasonable measure, ridiculous. A kazoo is a child's toy, a buzzing little nothing of an instrument, the sound of a birthday party or a cartoon. And here it is, parping away in the middle of a record by a band that the world would soon take very seriously indeed. Most listeners who notice it at all file the whole song under early Floyd silliness, a clumsy joke from before the band found its gravity, and they move on to the tracks that made the legend. I want to do the opposite. I want to stop on that kazoo, because that kazoo is one of the most revealing sounds Roger Waters ever committed to tape. And almost no one hears what it actually is. To understand it, you have to know one fact, and once you know it, the song never sounds the same again. Roger Waters never met his father. Eric Fletcher Waters was killed at Anzio, on the Italian coast, in February of 1944, cut down in one of the bloodiest stalemates of the Second World War. Roger had been born the previous September. He was 5 months old. He would grow up with a photograph, a few letters, a folded flag's worth of national gratitude, and an absence shaped exactly like a father. An absence that would sit at the center of his work for the next 50 years, like a stone at the bottom of a well. Every drop of water you hear in his music eventually falls toward that stone. And Corporal Clegg, this silly little song with its toy instrument, is the first time he ever reached for it. This is the beginning. Before the requiem, before the wall, before the bitter old man shouting at the world. There was a young songwriter in 1968, 24 years old, sitting down to write about the war that took the father he could not remember. And what came out was a joke. A wooden-legged veteran, a medal won in the war, and, the song sneers, found in a zoo, a wife perpetually drunk. The whole grotesque little portrait set to a bouncing tune and crowned with that absurd kazoo. The first thing Roger Waters ever said about his father's war, he said as a comedian. Now, the easy reading is that the young Waters simply had not found his seriousness yet. That this is juvenilia, a misfire, a writer not yet equal to his own material. I think that reading is not just wrong. I think it gets the truth exactly backward. The comedy is not a failure to be serious. The comedy is the seriousness, disguised, because the material was too dangerous to handle any other way. You do not make a joke about the thing that means nothing to you. You make a joke about the thing you cannot afford to feel directly. The kazoo is not Waters failing to mourn. The kazoo is the sound of a man who cannot yet let himself mourn, and who has found, in mockery, the only door into the room that is safe enough to open. Anyone who has lost someone too early, or too violently, or too completely to understand, knows this mechanism from the inside. The grief that is too large to be carried gets set down and laughed at instead, because laughter is grief that has been made portable. We joke at funerals. We joke about the dead. We tell the terrible story with a grin, because the grin is a wall we build between ourselves and the thing that would otherwise swallow us whole. Gallows humor is not the absence of pain. It is pain that is put on a costume in order to walk around in daylight. And Corporal Clegg is, from its first note to its ridiculous last, a piece of gallows humor about the gallows that took Roger Waters' father before Roger Waters could even speak. Listen again with that in your ears, and the song reorganizes itself completely. The wooden leg stops being a cheap gag and becomes what it actually is. The body of a man broken by a war and sent home in pieces. An image of damage played for laughs because the alternative is to look at it straight. The medal found in a zoo which sounds like nonsense, is actually a savage little thesis about the worthlessness of the honors a country hands out to the men it feeds into its wars. The same contempt for hollow patriotism that Waters would spend the rest of his career sharpening into a blade. Mrs. Clegg, drinking herself numb, is the collateral damage, the widow, the family left behind in the wreckage, the human cost that the war memorials never mention. Every element that scans as silly is, underneath, an early sketch of the exact themes that would one day be drawn in blood. The joke is not hiding the meaning. The joke is the meaning, wearing the only face that the 24-year-old Waters could bear to show. And here is where the song becomes genuinely moving rather than merely clever, because the comedy keeps cracking. There is a moment in Corporal Clegg where the tone shifts, where something tender and confused leaks through the satire, a sense of a real wound underneath the cartoon. The song cannot fully sustain its own joke. It keeps almost meaning what it is pretending not to mean. That instability, that flicker between mockery and grief, is the most honest thing in it, because it is the exact texture of how a young person actually handles a loss they were never given the chance to process. You laugh, and then for a second the laugh fails, and the thing you were laughing at looks back at you, and you laugh again quickly to cover it. The whole song is that flinch, set to music. It matters, too, that this is the only Pink Floyd album that contains all 5 men who ever held the name, the record made in the strange overlap when Syd Barrett was on his way out and David Gilmour had just arrived. So Corporal Clegg sits at a hinge in the band's history, the moment the founding genius was dissolving and the future voice was stepping in. And it is precisely at that hinge that Roger Waters quietly picks up the theme that will eventually become his alone. While the world was watching the drama of Syd, the real beginning of the next 50 years was happening in a silly song about a one-legged soldier, unnoticed, disguised as a joke, so that no one, perhaps including Waters himself, would see how much it weighed. Because that is the thing about a defense mechanism. It works by not being noticed, including by the person using it. I do not think the young Waters sat down and consciously decided to encode his father's death in comedy. I think the comedy was the only form the feeling could take at that age, in that man, at that distance from the event. The seriousness had not yet become available to him. He was not ready to write the final cut. He was 24, and the wound was 39 years away from being something he could look at without flinching. So it came out sideways, as it does for all of us, as a joke we tell without quite knowing why it is not actually funny. And this is why Corporal Clegg is not a curio. It is a first draft of a grief that would take Waters his entire life to write fair. Trace the line forward, and the whole shape of his career appears. The mockery of medals and the hollowness of military glory will return, stripped of the comedy, again and again. The dead father, joked about here, will be mourned openly later, named, wept over, dedicated to. The drunk and broken family will become the damaged inner world of an entire album about a man building a wall around himself. Every theme that defines the most ambitious and despairing work Pink Floyd ever made is already present in this 3-minute joke. Sitting there in plain sight, wearing a costume, buzzing on a kazoo, waiting 39 years for its author to grow old enough and brave enough to take the costume off. There is a particular cruelty in how the world received it, which the song could not have predicted and which makes it sadder in hindsight. Because it was funny, it was dismissed. Because Waters disguised the wound well enough to survive writing about it, listeners took the disguise at face value and filed the song under nonsense. The defense mechanism worked too well. It protected the feeling so completely that even the audience could not find it. And so the first time Roger Waters ever tried to speak about the defining loss of his life, the world heard a kazoo and laughed and looked away. Exactly as he had, in a sense, designed it to. He hit his father in a joke, and then everyone walked past the joke. And the father stayed hidden for 15 years. So when you listen to Corporal Clegg now, I would ask you to hear it not as early Floyd filler, but as something closer to a confession that has not yet found its courage. Hear the kazoo for what it is. The bravest sound on the record, the sound of a very young man approaching the edge of a grief too vast to enter, and finding that the only way in, for now, is to make a noise so silly that no one, least of all himself, will suspect he is standing at the edge of an abyss. The silliness is the depth. The joke is the love. The kazoo is the sound of a son who never met his father, knocking on a door he is not yet strong enough to open, and disguising the knock as a game. Roger Waters would bury his father more than once across his life's work, in different ways, with different faces. This was the first time. And it was the time he disguised as a joke. Because at 24, it was the only disguise that let him survive saying anything at all. There were other times coming. There were always going to be other times. The next time, the mask would begin to slip. And the time after that, there would be no mask left at all. So here's the question I will leave you with. The one that turns this silly little song into something that should haunt you. If the saddest things we carry can only come out, at first, dressed as comedy, then how many jokes have you laughed at, in your own life and in the lives of the people you love, that were really someone knocking quietly on the door of a grief they were not yet ready to open? Where art does not console for unsolved wounds, it autopsies.